I would like to welcome everyone who is joining us from different parts of Norway, from different parts of Scandinavia, the Nordics, and the world. As you probably know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So it is time to raise awareness of those living with mental and behavioral health issues, and to help reduce the stigma that so many people that are struggling with those issues experience. Now, I would like all of the speakers to introduce myself, and I will start. I will be a moderator today. My name is Ivo Grizovic. I work for Diversify. I'm a program director here. We also, for the people who are joining us or listen to us later who have visual impairment, we usually describe ourselves. So I'm a white Caucasian woman with long, straight, light hair. I'm wearing a black blazer and a black shirt, and my background is yellowish with a little bit of gray. Now I'm calling our speakers to also introduce myself. Selena, can you start?
Sure. Hello, my name is Selena. I'm a mixed heritage, white, British, Southeast Asian woman with mid-length brown hair. I'm wearing a collared shirt in a leopard print, and I've got a white wall behind me with a very green plant that I'm extremely proud of because I've kept it alive for many years. And I've got two colorful prints on the white wall behind me too.
Okay, Marin, can you?
Hi, everyone. My name's Marin. I am a white Australian Italian woman with olive skin. I have medium browny blonde hair. I'm sitting in an orange sofa. This is my place of reflection and doing talks. And I have a very old style Norwegian chimney in the background and some hooks. Yes.
Thank you, Marin. And Chisom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am the founder of Diversify, and today I am wearing a brown sweater with a black vest inside. I have curly long hair down my shoulders. I am a Black woman of African descent, and I am sitting, I think as always, behind a boring white wall. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I would also like to, if you can briefly just introduce like who you are, what you do, just quickly. Selena, we can start with you again.
Yeah, so I currently lead Ethiopian partnerships for youth mental health in Norway. And I run a consultancy working across different sectors, supporting organizations to build and flourish through capacity building, program management, participation, and inclusion.
Marin?
Sorry, I've just got a little bit of noise in the background, so I'm just hoping that it's not too loud. So about me, I'm a consultant. I work for myself. I kind of see myself as the nexus between corporates and big organizations, where I work on leadership, strategy, innovation. A lot of it's undergirded by, diversity, it's mental health, it's sustainability, these kinds of really key topics. And then on the other side, I work with startups who are people who want to start companies and also scale their companies, whether in Norway or outside of Norway as well. So that's
Thank you, Marin. And Chisom?
Hi again. I am an economist and DEI strategist, enthusiast, whatever you will call it, or you can call it. I work on projects that amplify, institutional and developmental change in countries, regions. And also, as a founder of Diversify, we work actively to amplify visibility and importance for DEIB initiatives. And we do that from an organizational change and systemic and structural change perspective. And I guess with my enthusiasm for DEI, I'm very much engaged in the discourse that affects more or less everyone on the diversity parameter, and actively try to learn and engage with people.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I mentioned, May is a Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's why we chose this important topic of mental health as a key topic in your D&I strategy. So I will start with the first question that I will pose to each one of you, starting with Selena. I guess we kind of have our how do you say, reke? Yeah. So Selena, what does mental health and well-being mean to you?
Mental health and well-being is how we act, how we feel. It affects how we relate to each other, how we make choices, and how we cope with the complexities of life, both good and bad. I think mental health and well-being are very much interconnected and on a continuum. You know, for example, you can have poor mental health but good well-being. And as we go through life and we face different complexities and challenges, we're all on this continuum. And mental health is fundamental for every one of us. It's part of being human, just like our physical health is. So as much as we want to occasionally avoid it, it's something that we can't. It's part of all of us. It's part of being human.
Great, thank you. What about you, Marion? What is mental health and well-being for you?
I guess when I talk about mental health and well-being, like Selena said, they're kind of intertwined. So I like to use the analogy about it's about putting your oxygen mask on. So, you know, when there's an emergency in a plane and the oxygen masks fall down, you're always told or taught to put your own mask on first. And I think for many of us, and I'm sure there's a lot of people joining who are probably looking for tools and resources themselves, you know, where a lot of us are people who won't put our own oxygen mask on first, but that's where it starts. And to be able to find strategies and tools and ways to be able to do that, I think the first thing is acknowledging that you're the one that has to reach out and put it on. No one's going to do it for you. And so when you're seeking help or support, you know, it starts with you having the awareness to say, I need to do something, and going from there. So I think for me, in my experience and working with leaders and teams, I find that the first thing is just that one step that makes all the difference with, you know, a mental health and well-being journey.
Great, thank you. And Chisom, what does mental health and well-being mean to you?
So just to affirm here that I completely agree with Selena and Marin. I think of mental health as my emotional, psychological, and social well-being. I think it is imperative to think about mental health from an equity and intersectional perspective. And just because I will probably talk about intersectionality and equity a lot today, those who attend this every month know, I'm just going to add really quick definitions. Intersectionality is an analytical framework that was developed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and it evaluates how our various identities interact to shape how we experience the world through layers of privilege or the lack thereof. And then equity is the acknowledgement that people need different things to thrive or to arrive at the same point. So it centers giving people what they need. So rather than start with equal access and mental health initiatives, we need to focus on equitable access. So one of the ways I think about mental health is also the acknowledgement that at any given time, our mental health affects how we respond to what is happening around us. And it dictates how we feel, how we act, how we handle stress, how we think, and how we engage or interact with others, and even what choices we make. So in the workplace or society, our mental health might be negatively affected by, say, workload, bad leadership, toxic work cultures, discrimination, inequities, and more. And lastly, I think that our mental health and well-being, as Selena said, it's interconnected and on a continuum. And it is very important at every stage of our lives, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. There's a reason why childhood trauma tends to fester for a long time when not addressed. And yeah, I just think that mental health is fluid and it continues to evolve.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chisholm. Such a great start from all three of you. So I'm going to continue with Selena. Why is mental health important at the workplace, and how might well-being impact organizations, businesses, and people?
Yeah, to give a bit of a picture, 1 in 4 of us in any given year will experience some kind of mental health problem. And sickness absence globally is the biggest reason for sickness absence from the workplace is mental illness. There was a research study in the UK recently by the Mental Health Foundation, and they found that 70 million work days per year are lost to sickness due to mental health problems. And they estimated that that equates to about £2.4 billion. So, we know intuitively that mental health is very important to us as individuals, but also workplaces, the languages that we need to use around this is, it does affect the bottom line. Our staff, well-being, teams, everyone around us, we fundamentally need to be happy and fulfilled and be able to realize our potential within the workplace. But ultimately also, if we're thinking about organizations, whether they're driven by profit or planet, it's always about people. And mental health is absolutely fundamental to that. Employees are probably more likely, they are more likely to come across a colleague that is experiencing suicidal thoughts, more likely than someone that's actually having a heart attack. So as we've all said so far, mental health is absolutely integral to the way that we perform and the way that we're able to show up. So workplaces, I think, are becoming even more aware now of how much mental health, well-being, and the culture around these issues actually completely affects the bottom line, the culture, and the atmosphere for all organizations.
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful to see how actually there's more and more talk about mental health and mental health at workplace. Yeah. So, Marin, you work with leaders and employees, and it usually also includes a need to address mental health in the workplace. What are the most common scenarios you see mental health challenges arising?
I think if we just look at COVID over the past 2 years, I think one of the most interesting things has been people experiencing burnout. So globally, I think it's 75% of the workforce has experienced burnout. So I think this is a very interesting dynamic, because when a lot of people, like knowledge workers, started working remotely, there was a question of whether there was an ability to trust that people would get the work done. And now we're seeing how difficult it is to actually draw a line in the sand and get people to switch off, because they're just not breaking the stress cycle. So they're working, they're always, on their computer or checking their emails, that there's this continual access and, okay, I'll just quickly get this done, because you're in your home environment all the time. So I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've seen a lot of managers saying, hey, our staff's getting burnt out. We need to do something about this. There's also this feelings of isolation as well. When you're working from home, you don't have that sense of connectedness. Being able to be physically around people, just having a connection point where someone says, hey, how are you? Just, what's going on in your life? You need to be very intentional about checking in with people when you're working from online. And I think sometimes, again, going back to this inability or struggle to break the stress cycle, we go from one meeting to another, and then we're doing the work, implementing the work, for example. So there's no ability to sort of just have those little pockets of time where you might be going to get your coffee, or you're hanging around the water cooler and just having a chin wag about what's going on in someone's life, or being able to pick up the nuances. So being able to give people tools to identify or ask what's going on, especially in a more increasing digital landscape, is really important. So I'd say these are pretty key things. And also wrapped up in that is this understanding of how we build resilience in individuals and therefore in teams. So there's many layers to it. It's what can the managers do and the leaders, because there needs to be a top-down approach, but also as teams and individuals, how do we become aware of what's going on with our peers and stay connected? And then as the individual, how do I express what my needs are going forward, and how the organization can support me?
Absolutely, absolutely. That is so important. I would just like to call our audience and tell you again that we would really love to hear your thoughts, your comments, and of course your questions. I'm going to continue with Chisholm. So conversations about DIB in the workplace have given rise to discussions about mental health in the workplace, psychological safety at work, showing up as our full selves, etc. For organizations who are embarking on this journey and regarding the ways it is currently being addressed, where do you see gaps or perhaps an opportunity for improvement?
Thanks, Eva. I think there are a number of gaps. At the extreme, it's just like not acknowledged at all. Like it's not even on the agenda. But I will talk about a few, perhaps. I think that if we go back to the construct of psychological safety and showing up as your full selves, it is very meaningful and it's important. But I think in discourse, especially around DEIB, it has become buzzwords that people toss around sometimes on a performative basis, like, hey, look at us, we'll work. Yeah. Oftentimes, there are no systems and structures to actually support a workplace culture where people feel psychologically safe to exist in, and that allows people to truly show up as themselves. Companies that actually want to work with this must therefore describe and define for itself what that means, like what does psychological safety or our authentic self means for the construct of this workplace. And also from the perspective of the people you currently have and the people you want to attract. So I'm talking about this from a systemic design perspective. So by thinking on a basis of systems and structures, systems thinking allows us to make sense of complexity of the world. And in this case, the complexity of something as massive as mental health that, means different things for different people, depending on the day and on the context, right? So I think that a systemic design approach is very important because it also employs a human-centric perspective when building, mental health programs or initiatives. And if inclusion and equity are the goal, then initiatives that amplifies psychological safety must be intentional, conscious, measurable, and inclusive of the 100%, not the 90%, not the 99%, but 100% of people. And the second thing I want to mention here, no surprise, is intersectionality, right? Blankets or generic programs are not sufficient. So if Eva and I, for example, work under a boss who is toxic, who micromanages us and has unrealistic work expectations, she and I will suffer the stress from working with a boss like that, right? Now, on top of that, if our workplace is hardly diverse, and I am, say, one of the only few people of color there, and I have to cover or fend off microaggressions on a frequent basis, not only from the said boss, but also from colleagues who might not be aware that they are, delivering microaggressions towards me, a workplace mental health strategy that is one size fits all will not work well, because it will work for me and Eva on one end, but on the other hand, it would not work well for me because it doesn't attend to all the challenges that I'm facing in the workplace. And on the basis of tools, because there are a lot of tools out in the world that you can use, and a lot of them are quite good, we must also be mindful on the tools that we choose. It's very important, also going back to systemic design, to think from the perspective of who developed this. How has the tool been designed to be as inclusive as possible from an intersectional perspective, right? If you see that there are gaps in tools that you might be using currently, then find a better tool, use a better tool.
I just want to build on that, if you don't mind, Eva, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think one of the things that is still happening now, especially in a workplace, is all these things are siloed, right? We have sustainability as one silo and climate, then we have diversity as another one, then we have mental health as another one. And I think what's really important in moving forward is these things are all interconnected, right? So when you develop any strategy, if you go back to systemically, these are the things that need to change. And when leaders are implementing strategy of any kind, you know, innovations linked to diversity, diversity is linked to mental health, you know, so on and so forth. So we need to be able to have this integrated approach of building a foundation that doesn't just say, oh, and by the way, let's look in the little mental health category or the DEIB category. It's about an integrated approach and attitude, and to be able to get leaders to start thinking like that as well as individuals in teams. I think that's where the change needs to happen. So totally agree with that system thinking.
And just to add to that, Marion, you know, Chisholm was talking about tools, and you know, I've been working with tools for a long time around how to embed mental health support in organizations and structures. And actually, as Chisholm's saying, you know, the perspective on how integral mental health is and how different people can be affected differently and uniquely in organizations, our understanding is really evolving. So some of these tools actually are good, fit for purpose, but could be better. And there's something about working in the organizations to make sure that leaders have the space to not just take off-the-shelf tools, but to actually start including their employees, their stakeholders in how to make that relevant for the context in the organization. I think taking off-the-shelf tools is great, step one. If you're going from zero, step one is good work. But actually to really meet outcomes and to make sure that we've got really healthy, effective, productive teams and happy work culture and environment, we have to make this the stellar, the best practice, the excellent is taking those tools, prioritizing mental health, and then making it fit for the actual context within which you're in. And that could be an organization, a project of 3 people, or an organization across countries internationally. And we have to be able to give leaders the recognition and the ability to spend some time prioritizing mental health and using tools and then embedding them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Selena. So back to you, Selena. So in the conversation that we had in preparation for this event, you mentioned that stress can cause mental health challenges. Can you speak more to how stress gives rise to mental health challenges in the workplace or otherwise, and how organizations might use tools to mitigate stress in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of us are familiar with terms like stress. It's thrown around pretty easily. You know, I feel stressed. Is something that most of us have probably heard in a workplace environment. And I think our collective understanding of this is evolving. And, you know, Marion was referencing before the statistic, the Mental Health Foundation in the UK cites the same statistic, around 74% of employees have experienced stress. And stress in general is understood by the World Health Organization as a workplace phenomenon. Workplace stress is critical. And stress is actually, it refers to any pressure, physical or emotional, on ourselves in reaction to a trigger or a situation. And what stress does is that it puts our body into fight or flight, and we release hormones, stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, and even short term, but long term, this can really start to affect the way that we function. So in relation to the workplace, our ability to concentrate, our ability to be creative, our ability to relate to other people, to show up, to be effective, it's at critical points actually. Stress is most common in public services and in education sector. You know, you've probably heard teachers, health workers, it's at critical levels, but it affects all of us. And it's not always possible to remove the causes of stress. Causes of stress, for example, as we know, big life changes, work pressure, deadlines, too much responsibility, but also we can feel stressed when we're underworked, when there aren't clear structures, when we're not stimulated, and for example, weak or lacking managerial structures and processes can make people feel stressed. And of course, you know, in the last couple of years, job security makes people feel very stressed too. And the fact that we can't remove a lot of these causes of stress, therefore we need to start thinking about how we actually deal with and cope with this reality as individuals and as organizations. Long-term stress, chronic stress causes burnout. And burnout in and of itself can be looked at, again, you know, the World Health Organization looks at this as a workplace phenomenon. It's something that's happening in the workplace at chronic levels. And people as individuals, we can support ourselves through seeking support through line management processes, finding about what mental health support is actually available in your organization. Scheduling breaks is something super simple, but actually very difficult to do, especially if you're someone that is used to being on the go and maybe even has got used to using stress as a motivator. We need to start differentiating between healthy short-term stress that motivates us, gives us energy, and when that starts to creep into long-term stress that's affecting our nervous system. Meditation, mindfulness, of course, helps, seeking therapy and counseling. But from an organizational perspective, I think sometimes it can feel like a very abstract, difficult to deal with problem. It's just something that is part and parcel of the workplace. But actually, as I was saying, our collective understanding is now getting much clearer that healthy employees, staff well-being, when that is optimized, it's affecting the bottom line. It's a healthier workplace. We're able to meet outcomes both profit-wise, but also sustainability-wise for our planet and ourselves as individuals. So I actually wanted to share just a couple of very practical ways that organizations can start to think about supporting the mental health of their staff teams and their employees. Getting clear on the context in which organizations and businesses are in. So what country are you in, and what does the government do to support? You know, there's a whole spectrum of this globally. Here in Norway, I think we're going to talk about it, but generally they have really robust systems, but that might not be the case for everyone. But even so, organizations need to start with what kind of support can I get? What are my rights as an employer, and what are the rights of my employees? Understanding that is really key. Embedding systems and structures. So all the way through from the recruitment process to line management processes to organizational development goals, exit interviews, talking about mental health and using tools to approach difficult conversations. There are really simple tools such as wellbeing action plans, which are, you know, there's lots of resources out there, many of them free, and they're really simple tools to basically facilitate difficult conversations and to build the competency of different levels, managers, colleagues, on how to start approaching this. And as Chisholm was talking about, and we touched on briefly, tools like that you can get off the shelf, but I would encourage organizations to take them, look at them, and then involve the people within their context into how to develop that. So how can we talk about mental health, but then also intersectionality, different ways that people's lives are affected? How can the organization support individuals? And I think some of the problem can be that managers feel very insecure about these kind of conversations because they feel, what is my responsibility? If I actually ask someone how they are and they're not okay, what do I do? And again, there's lots of resources, there's trainings, there's ways, very simple, very practical ways that managers, leaders, colleagues can learn to spot the signs of mental health problems and then think about what action then needs to be taken, and then discussions internally about what our responsibilities are and what to do in an emergency if someone's in a mental health crisis as well. Ensuring that there are really clear policies and procedures related to mental health, and that these are visible and accessible to everyone, so that employees and staff team members can understand that this is a priority for the organization. And then awareness raising activities. So as Chisholm was talking about, creating that safe space. So for employees to feel that, oh, this is something that's taken seriously by my organization. You know, Mental Health Awareness Month, Mental Health Awareness Days. Sometimes these things can feel a bit lightweight, but actually what it is, it's about making people see that it's a safe place to talk about mental health and to address the stigma that you talked about, Eva.
Wow. I hope people were taking notes because these things are super important. No, thank you, Selena. This is
can
fantastic.
I add to that as well? Thanks, Selena. That was very comprehensive. I think that another practical thing that companies can do, especially when people are coming in, they're just recruiting, is also to include a blurb or more on mental health and wellness and that practice and the belief in the employee handbook. You know, that is one of the first ways to clearly indicate to people who are coming in, or to employees who are there, like just in case, like, okay, I'm struggling, where do I start? If I don't feel comfortable going to my direct manager or my colleague, that I have something written in a policy book somewhere to consult. So I think that is a practical tip that companies can implement today. And also, I think, you know, Serena shared really great points around having a tool and also involving people in the design of that the process. And I think that the only thing I will add to that is to say, before you actually get to the tool part, engage your people in conversations. Do not design anything without including the people for which it is designed for from the onset. So oftentimes you see that companies, they have a chat, make a decision and say, this is what we want to do. What do you all think? And that is not an inclusive way of including different people. So do it from the start. Like, we want to have this conversation. Marion, Eva, Selena, get in the room. Let's chat. That's where you want to start.
Yeah, I just want to, build on that as well, because I know with teams I've worked with, often it will be, okay, we need to change a new process, or we need to, you know, be more innovative and agile in our thinking. But then when it comes to, you know, facilitating and doing the work, often, you know, a lot of the reasons that they're trying to improve processes and productivity is because they're all overworked and, you know, they're riding the line of burnout. And one of the most, I think that the best teams that get past this is, first of all, having that open dialogue. So before you even get to the, okay, we need to figure out how this policy works for our team, it's like, let's discuss as individuals what's going on. And it may feel for some teams that this is a bit fluffy, or, you know, it's just talking about feelings. But the thing is, every time I do these kinds of activities, is where people get to express and share their experiences with, as Chisholm was talking about, this psychological safety, where it's okay to show up and, you know, be your full self and express how things are going for you in and out of the workforce. That's when you can start creating meaningful policies, because you have the team in the room. You see the differences, especially in international teams, when you're looking at women, people of color. I mean, you know, everyone has different nuances in intersectionalities within these things. Maybe there's someone who has special needs children, or just families in general. So they're all things that end up being factors in how the rules of engagement change for each team. So absolutely having a living policy in place where organizations can say, okay, well, what does this mean for our team? What does that look like? I think it's like Selena touched on before, you have these off-the-shelf solutions, or a policy that says this is how we treat the situation, but being able to take it into teams and saying, okay, as a manager, how do I best support the needs of my team? Because it needs to come back to sort of a more granular level, as well as having that organizational overview, in order for it to be real and to actually have that I guess freedom to be able to express and do something with their mental health challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. Oh, this is all so important. Thank you, ladies, for sharing all of this. And I really hope that people are taking notes. And please, again, I'm going to ask you to share your comments, share your thoughts with us in the chat and your questions. We would really like to know, like, what are your experiences and your thoughts on this? But coming back to Chisholm and intersectionality, which is nothing without that. So mental health and well-being is contextual. In diverse themes, mental health is impacted by compounding identities as well as unique life experiences and stress factors. So my question is twofold. What does intersectionality have to do with mental health? And what can companies do to provide systems and structures for mental health that are inclusive for the 100%, as you already mentioned a little bit about that?
Thank you. I think on what companies can do, both Marion and Selena have also shared really good tips. So perhaps I won't spend so long on that. But for the first question on what does intersectionality have to do with mental health? Well, dare I say everything, right? Intersectionality requires us to acknowledge that my many identities, for example, like, so let's list that. I am a cisgendered woman who's Black, an African, a mom, a partner, an entrepreneur, highly educated, grown up in the West, and different regions, different countries. And all my other identities, they have shaped the way I experience, navigate, and negotiate the world. So if you don't see me, if you cannot hear me, if you do not understand my experience, how are you supposed to help me? Right. And, you know, you can, every single one of us here today is intersectional. You can think of yourself as, I'm a white woman, I come from Croatia or Australia, you know, like I have these challenges or that, and this compounds the way you experience the world and gives you levels of privilege or the lack thereof, right? So to nuance the importance of intersectionality to mental health strategies, therapies, what have you, I'm a strong believer of therapy. I am happy to pay money to a therapist, a psychologist to just listen to me talk because it is very beneficial. Now, I can't say, and we're having an honest conversation here, so I can say that also based on my series of personal experiences, I've been seeing therapists since I was, I think, about 17, so a long time. And also based on the experiences of my friends of color, for example, I am not comfortable speaking to therapists or psychologists who are not people of color because I have that bias from experience that they cannot help me because my particular set of challenges also comes from lived experience that sometimes is just easier when somebody gets, right? You don't know what you don't know. And I need a therapist that I feel like I don't have to educate, and one who can validate my experience and also understand me. Now, this said, I absolutely know that there are very skilled therapists who are not people of color, you know, but understanding where intersectionality comes into place, that sometimes your particular set of intersectionality can cause a hindrance. So if you are a lesbian couple with a disabled child, and you were talking to a therapist who does not have an understanding of what that is, or the empathy or compassion to, you know, try to understand where you were coming from, then it's really difficult to get help if your other identities that compounds that experience is not understood. And just a little bit here to your second question, you know, and I think anyone who shows up here knows I always say this, you know, I think that what companies can do to design systems and structures that are inclusive of the 100% is to use systemic design and a human-centric approach. Mary talked about it earlier, just in terms of like, we can't look at things in silos or in parts. We have to look at them as a whole, right? And it is very important to design for people and include those people from the onset in the initiatives and the projects that are being designed for them. So for me, how I tend to think about this from an intersectional perspective is to ask, is everyone in the room, right? It's that thing about nothing about us without us.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that as well, Chisholm, because, that question, just a basic, whether you're a manager, whether you're an individual, you can ask, are the right people in the room? Because often when these policies or initiatives are being created, like the people in who are making the decisions aren't reflective of the teams that they're working in or managing, or B, the customers that they're serving. So from a basic, and that goes across the board, not just for mental health, but understanding, the people that we're serving in whichever way that, is for the organization, just asking the question, do we have the right people in the room, and can we engage other people that can, make a more reflective, well-rounded approach to what we're building here, is really important, and anyone can do it.
Absolutely. I was just reading what Lovisa shared with us about how actually stress, burnout, and the fatigue does not only affect employees, but their families also, and how kind of like a domino effect can all of this have, and how important it is to think about that, how it is at the workplace, and about the mental health, not only one person, because it impacts their whole social life, right? So Marin, we're coming back to you. So we often hear the phrase, come as your full self in the workplace. I've also mentioned it before. So what does it mean? What does that mean in theory? And how does it unfold in practice?
Oh, I mean, there's so many layers to this question. And I think between Chisholm and Selena, they might have some more granular things to talk, and practical things. But I think, this intersectionality and diversity is a huge part of this, because there are so many people that don't fit into the, status quo way of, whether it's the organization or the team dynamics, these kinds of things, and can't bring their full selves to work. I mean, there's many layers of, as a woman, or Chisholm often talks about, being in a situation where you're asked to make the coffee or take the notes, and so there's so many layers in terms of how you're treated, and how that affects how you behave. So I think one of the things is, if you go back to working with managers, because I think organizational change is imperative, but immediate change can happen from leaders. And we know that, most often people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. So if we focus on how can bosses become better leaders to support the individuals in their teams, that's kind of the level that we need to be at. And any kind of middle manager and, moving further up the chain can do that. And so I think one of the things that has fundamentally changed is that people want to feel seen at work. So they want to have a leader who says, hey, I see, your intersectionalities, I see your qualities, I see your skills and what you're bringing to the table. I understand, or I'm paying attention to you. How do I get up under you and help you be the best version of yourself? Because, I've been in organizations, I've worked with companies as well, where sometimes I can be that kind of super passionate, really engaged, have that energy, but other times I feel like a really watered down version of myself. And, sometimes as individuals, it's like, okay, well, was this me, or was this an off day, or something else that's going on? Or is it because there's an environment around me that isn't allowing me to thrive, and I'm feeling very hemmed in because I've been boxed? And, so there's different layers again, as I mentioned, but I think as managers, just making a concerted effort beyond even the, of course there's practical steps and tools, but just from a human-centered approach, as Chisholm talked about before, noticing what's going on with your employees, thinking about what's in their best interest. Like, true leadership is when you can get up under an individual and bring them up and help them to shine and help them aspire to where they want to go in life. I know that's becoming a lot more essential with organizations. Instead of saying, okay, we just want to help them thrive at their job, which is going to, meet a certain amount of KPIs, etc. It's what is their career journey, and how do we support them in that whole cycle, or aspirational journey, sorry, not just career, because it's outside of work as well. So I think when we talk about showing up to work as our full selves as well. I think it's different on a cultural level. I mean, in Australia or the US or the UK, these markets that I know reasonably well, you know, sometimes you want to bring that wholehearted, passionate, you know, self to work. Other people in organizations want to just get the job done, you know, work however, you know, head down, do the work and leave and make all this time for extracurricular activities. So I think it looks very different for different people. And again, it comes back to how do you as a manager see an individual and assess or work with them based on what their aspirations are so that they can show up in the way that they want to. Because yeah, it looks very different for everyone.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to go to Chisholm and kind of build up on what was Marin saying. So yeah, she was saying about coming as our full selves to work. So with this in mind, and with regards to mental health and well-being, what is workplace disclosure? And what are the consequences and or challenges in practice?
Thank you. And yeah, really great job nuancing that, Marin. So I think going from what Marin said, workplace disclosure then would be a place where you feel psychologically safe and you can come as your authentic self. So what that means that if you struggle with, say, mental health, or you have a disability or are neurodiverse, you know, disclosure could be, you know, the ability to discuss your situation and provide practical suggestions for reasonable accommodations if they are needed. And your company should be able to provide you with the accommodations that you need. So this is the idea in practice. And therefore, in practice, this should not cause harm. And your disclosure should not be consciously or unconsciously weaponized or have any repercussions. In practice, you know, if you disclose in a toxic workplace or one where DIB isn't centered or even on the agenda, it may do more harm than good. It might negatively affect the types of projects you get or how people think of you. In an ideal world, you know, we should always feel confident and comfortable to disclose our full selves. But in reality, without corresponding and inclusive systems and structures, disclosure initiatives are like blowing air bubbles. It's a phrase I learned from Eva. So when you're doing performative work, Eva says you're blowing air bubbles. So I'm going to use that, right? And to continue, you know, companies need to critically assess for themselves what it truly means to come to work as your full self. I've spoken to a lot of companies, and just to nuance this, you know, oftentimes what that means to companies, like, come as a vivacious, opinionated, energetic, professionally quirky and outspoken serve, right? This is what they think about. But ultimately, what that really means is come as all those fabulous things, but also come as you are when you're struggling with anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder and the like. You know, I mean, can a person truly come as they are if they're non-binary, trans, hijab wearing Muslim? Human beings are complex. Their full selves are not only what we perceive as positive. So in theory, disclosure sounds wonderful. In practice, it can cause harm when that information is not received with compassion, empathy, responsibility, or structure. And I also want to nuance here that it is absolutely okay not to disclose, because for some people, non-disclosure is survival, right? And moreover, you know, disclosure should not depend on, or companies should not depend on people in their organizations to disclose in order to create solutions that are universally inclusive and accessible. And if you think about it from a practical perspective, if you have 10,000 employees and all of them come to you and they're disclosing and they need this and they need that, that can also be overwhelming. That is like a full-time job for at least 50 people, right? So one of the ways companies can also address this is to look at creating solutions. One of the ways I think about this is if you design solutions for the most marginalized groups of people, you inherently remove all the challenges for everybody else, right? So one of the ways to think about this from a company perspective is, how can I have a universally accessible workplace that is inclusive of everybody, be it whether they have a disability or a mental health challenge or whatever it is? Think universal accessibility.
Yes, this is just such an important topic, and this workplace disclosure, and if you have mental health issues, especially because there's such stigma around it and nobody wants to say it, especially in the workplace. So I'm also inviting our audience, if they want to share, what do they think about how is it at your workplace? Do you feel safe enough that you would be able to disclose any kind of mental health issues? If you have some anxieties, if you have some depression, any kind of, I really would like to know if you'd like to share, how is it at your workplaces? How do you feel? Just to see how it works in different countries and in different organizations and companies. So
and I can kick that off by just saying, I mean, I have an anxiety disorder. I manage it. You know, I've had it for most of my adult life, and yeah, in some workplaces it's just horrible, and in other workplaces I have the systems and the structures that, you know, that I need to thrive. And in my workplace, you know, it's just that using honesty and creating a space where if I'm able to share that I have this challenge, and sorry, ladies, today is not a good day, I'm just going to lay on the couch and do absolutely nothing. You know, also giving other people permission to disclose and not have that shame and stigma, you know. And I think for me personally, as a Nigerian raised in, you know, the US, you know, in Nigeria, the concept of like mental health, you know, I remember having a conversation with my mother when I was in the Netherlands, and I said, hey, I need to see a therapist. She's like, why? Don't you have everything you need? Why do you have mental health problem? And yes, I'm trying to mimic the way my mother would react to this. And this is just I don't understand. Help me understand. Why don't you have a house? You know, aren't you fed? Why are you challenged? Please get over that, because mental health is a luxury. This is how it's thought about, or it's looked at negatively. You know, it's like something you have done, a crime you have committed in your past life. It's so ridiculous, like the different systems and cultures that impacts, you know, the stigma that is associated with mental health. And it wasn't up until I think like maybe the past 5 or 6 years that I've been able to just say, yeah, I have this challenge. Well, guess what? Right? It happens. And a lot of people, you know, might be struggling with something that is invisible. Like it's easy when you have a visible disability and you're in a wheelchair, or, you know, you have like hearing impairment. But when you struggle with, you know, a challenge, a mental health challenge, or a disability that is invisible, it's really difficult to, you know, I guess in my situation where I have like an anxiety attack, I feel like everything is closing in on me. Like the world is like shrinking and I'm like shrinking. So it's like just having systems and structures that supports you to actually disclose, and you don't feel like you will be punished for it.
I love how you're talking about the layers here, because there's, you know, organization, there's individual, there's how we were raised as well. I have a funny story from my father, who I'd say is a very sort of positive influence in my life. He's the sort of father that would send me off to school and say, whatever you do, do your best, or like never, ever, 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 ever give up. And, you know, so very optimistic kind of person. But I remember him talking about feelings and emotions and saying, you know, you just got to get them and put them into a box and tie it up and wrap some chains around it and drop it into the bottom of the ocean. It's like, wow. You know, that's probably the worst thing that you could do. But these are the narratives that we're told. And, you know, the tools, as you said, Chisom, weren't around then to have that awareness or, you know, understanding of mental health. And even still, there's so much shame around it as well. Oh yes, Lavisa, I can see, said sounds a bit like toxic positivity. I think sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I guess, you know, it depends on the context. But yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, trying to have a positive approach, or, you know, from one extreme to the other of, you know, just be positive and happy, or like dump your feelings in the bottom of the ocean. I think we've all had stories or narratives from the people we look up to about that. And we're kind of pioneering and paving a way to do things differently now, which is a real struggle. And Chisholm, you talk about your anxiety, and, you know, I'm teaching about burnout at work, and, you know, how to, you know, like EQ strategies on emotional intelligence. And I constantly bordering the line of burnout, and I have the tools and I have the understanding, and I'm coaching people in how they can create better boundaries for themselves, and I still struggle with those boundaries. So I think one of the things that you talked about before, Chisholm, was this shine theory, and I, you know, is that something you could share later on? Because I think that that's a really helpful way for us who are in this space, or in you know, have the tools and knowledge, but are still having these experiences that
maybe you can share it in the tips, Chisholm, at the end. Okay, so we have half an hour now. So from all of the prepared questions, I will have to skip some of them. I hope you believe my choice. So I'm going to go to Selena and ask her, what is compassionate leadership and how does it contribute to well-being in the workplace? And then Chisholm, if you can briefly speak to the importance of allyship and power to compassionate leadership and workplace well-being.
Thank you, Eva. Compassionate leadership, I believe, is something that can be taught and learnt. Again, with talking about mental health and compassion, sometimes these things can feel a bit intangible. And for sure, there are leaders probably that we've all worked with and know well that have a natural gift as a compassionate leader. And we know what it's like to thrive with people that are compassionate. But I also believe that there are quite tangible skills that can be attributed to a compassionate leader. And compassionate leadership is about attending. So really listening deeply to the realities for people. It's about understanding people's behavior, the why they are saying and doing the things that they do, and about cultivating empathy. So really caring for ourselves and the people around us. And one thing that came up for me just as we were speaking just now, so I'm glad we've moved to this question. I think when we talk about mental health in the workplace, sometimes we can put too much responsibility on top leaders in a hierarchical sense, because for sure, the quickest way to embed a healthier workplace is for policies and procedures, as we talked about, and structures and systems to be created, and for leaders to be spouting about these naturally all the time. But just as, you know, Merrin was talking about, often it's leaders themselves or facilitators ourselves that are talking about how to look after yourself, how to have a healthier work environment. And we're not necessarily doing those things for ourselves. So I just wanted to nuance compassionate leadership as well, that it's not necessarily just about your traditional leader, but compassionate leadership can be peer-to-peer, or with colleagues, or with clients, or people that we're working with. Leadership can be about self-leadership. How do we resource ourselves? How do we look to our networks to create space? And whether you're a leader from a hierarchical sense, or you're just taking a leadership role to change culture within relationships, within client relationships, within team relationships, that can be compassionate leadership. And reflective space, I think, is really key to that. So giving people the time that they can prioritize being present with people to really listen. Because if we're really going to be creative and innovative and move towards better solutions for all of us, whatever sector you're working in, we have to have space to reflect, to think about what we did well and where we can improve and what we can do better, and reflect on and take action on the nuances that we've all talked about.
Yes, absolutely. Chisholm, do you need me to repeat the question for you?
Yes, please.
So can you briefly speak to the importance of allyship and power in compassionate leadership and workplace well-being?
Yeah. What comes up for me now, and I think Marion alluded to it, is like the responsibility of leadership, and viewing leadership. Oftentimes we think of leaders as the people who are like director of this or manager of that, right? And Selena just nuanced as well that anyone can, be a compassionate leader. So I guess just to frame how I see this, I think that leadership must be earned every single day. You have to show up every day and earn that spot as a leader. I think it requires humility, respect, curiosity, and a whole lot of introspection, right? Leadership is a privilege, and it's so important that it's not abused. I think that because we often see leadership or leaders like within positions of power, many times, it's generally just based on performance and time spent in a role. So inclusive leadership or compassionate leadership actually transcends traditional understanding of the word leadership. So how does it relate to allyship and power? I think it's important to also nuance that allyship that is not actionable is not allyship. Allyship is an active and evolving state of existence, right? Allyship means showing up and using your privilege and your power to speak truth to power. Dr. Yaba Vale, love her, as she puts it, we need to think of allyship as being an accomplice, right? Because if something goes wrong, an ally could say to me, I'm here if you need to talk, right? Whereas an accomplice would be like, what do I need to break? What do we set on fire to ensure that this doesn't happen again? So you have a stake in it in some sense. So I think until we start to think of allyship in an actionable way, we can fly our pride flags, put black squares for BLM, put a fantastic post out about International Women's Day or a fancy quote about Martin Luther King, and it will all be performative because it doesn't come from the heart, right? So I think that a compassionate leader will recognize the importance of allyship. To lead, we also have to follow. A compassionate leader also needs to be aware of intersectionality and the importance and the positive impact of equity and belonging in the workplace well-being. And how does allyship tie in with power? Oftentimes when I talk to people about power, they often ask, how do we share power? If I'm sharing my power, does that mean that I have to give up some? Actually, no, you don't have to give up power to share it. And I think this idea of lack or loss is misinformed, because there's absolutely room for everybody. And if you think about what is sharing power in practice, it could be me in a room where Eva cannot get a word in and me saying, Eva, I noticed you had something to say. What do you have to say? We'd love to hear it, right? It's the bringing somebody in or mentioning somebody's name or somebody's work in a room full of opportunities. And then, of course, here we can also relate back to shine theory, right? As Marin mentioned earlier, is just wanting and willing the absolute best for your colleagues, for your people, for the teams that you lead, for your friends. And that also includes, it's not only like, in good times and yay, let's celebrate. It also means when things are hard, it's the ability to have difficult conversations and still do it with respect and still do it from the perspective of, Marin, I want you to shine. I want you to be your best self. And if I see that you're not doing that, I'm going to just call you out on it or call you in on it until I see change, right? So that's kind of how I think about allyship and power and how it relates to leadership.
Yeah. Could I just jump in and add something there, which I think is an important point, and it just builds on what you're saying, Chisholm, but these skills that we're talking around compassionate leadership, essentially it's about building trust, trusting ourselves to be present and take time. We all know that feeling of distraction, busy, on to the next thing. Sometimes that's a way of not really sitting with what is for ourselves and for the people that we work with, whether we actually have responsibility for them or not. And if we're able to build that trust, we're more able to have honest conversations, difficult conversations like Chisholm was talking about. And then we can be more responsive when we're having to bridge difference, or we're having to deal with sudden risks or incidents or the unknown. Basically, building that trust is just key. It makes organizations from all sectors more agile and more able to respond in a way that's sustainable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we have Christopher commenting here about the responsibility of the leaders and the bravery of the leaders, actually, that needs to be part of their role and part of the compassionate leadership, actually, because it's not always comfortable, it's not always known, it's not always something that is familiar to us, right? Thank you so much, ladies. I'm going to Marin. So you are an entrepreneur, you're self-employed, and on a basis of mental health and well-being, what challenges do entrepreneurs face, and how do you navigate these challenges?
Mm-hmm. I guess there's many different areas running your own company. I mean, first and foremost, you have to support yourself to put food on a table. You know, the way that you find clients, you know, maybe you've got people working for you or working with you that you are accountable to. Maybe you have investors that are expecting you to you know, have a certain amount of momentum in the company. Like there's so many things just from a practical foundational level to you know, how do you get your higher needs met as well? You know, starting your own company and how you grow that and build it requires so much, and it's constantly adapting and changing to what the market needs are, whether you're doing a tech startup or, you know, any kind of entrepreneurial venture. So I think you know, the onus is constantly put back on you. It's not like you can just sort of switch off and say, you know what, my job's done for today, because you are living in that you know, what you do. And this also goes for employers as well, but I'm just talking from an entrepreneurial perspective. Often what you do and who you are interconnected, and it's really hard to draw the line or find where that fits. I know there is a global accelerator network, and they connect with a lot of different incubators and accelerator programs globally, and they're based out of Silicon Valley. And one of the things that, you know, basically they have all these different tools and resources that you can use, whether it's Amazon Web Services to, you know, like connecting with the different incubators and accelerators around the world. One of the things that they realized some years, it was even before COVID, was the mental health strain of entrepreneurs. And in, I think it was 2019 when I came across this program. It's been established for quite a while, but there was a series of entrepreneurs committing suicide, which basically made them realize, shit, we need to be able to provide mental health services for our startups, for our entrepreneurs. So it's an increasingly big issue and challenge to tackle as well. I know I've worked with companies that, you know, they've just been pushing, they've been in this valley of death kind of trying to raise funds, etc., pay a team, you know, gain traction on their idea, and they just get burnt out and then they can't work. So it's pretty damaging. And then again, we talked about how, you know, the families are affected. So you have this stress cycle where you can't break out of it at work, and then you're going into a stress cycle in your family environment. Maybe you also need some kind of like social connection. And then so the sliver of time left for you is, you know, marginal at most. So I think that's one thing that I'm trying to get better at for myself. Well, first of all, one of the things that I think is really important for my own mental health and well-being is equipping myself with EQ tools, so emotional intelligence, and being able to say, okay, I might feel this way, but what's actually the case, or what's going on, or how do I become more emotionally agile? And I know from, you know, the last session with Her Space we did, that I did on EQ, I have a lot of funny little tools where it might be taking a pause button. So maybe I'm just bombarded with work, but just recognizing, like I used to have a post-it note that's like pause button. Okay, I have the power to pause right now. And if I take 2 minutes to myself, that 2 minutes is everything, where I can just kind of blank, you know, my mind can go blank, and I know in 2 minutes time the work is going to be there. But these are certain things to just kind of reground yourself that I've found really helpful. So EQ tools, also just, you know, kind of, yeah, I think what I was talking about before is this idea of breaking the stress cycle. That could be anything from having a laugh with a friend, phoning a friend. It could be smashing it out at the gym. It could be going for a walk. But one of the key things with breaking the stress cycle is you need to do something that makes you feel emotionally safe. So that's different for everyone. So I think that there's, you know, different periods where I just need to do nothing and just sit and maybe do some breathing exercises. There's other times where I just need to smash it out at the gym. Sometimes I just feel so wired from work and I'm full of adrenaline that I need to run 10Ks and then cycle another 20Ks until I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm grounded back in myself. But I think it's different for everyone, but those things seem to work for me. But I think one of the hardest things as an entrepreneur is also keeping that consistent, because every day looks different. You might be running a workshop or working on a client case or, you know, out and about. I think having consistency when everything around you is inconsistent is important to try and master. But, you know, it's an ongoing journey for me.
I really like the pause button because I visualized that when I heard you say it. I think it was 2 years ago now, maybe. And, you know, like it's one of the tools that I use now, just visualizing that, you know, I have a light switch that I can just like turn off and pause and before I respond, as opposed to like going into that panic and like, and respond and do the wrong thing. Just like take a bus, take a breather, turn off the light switch for a second and think. So that has been really helpful. So thank you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so people, I hope that is one of the takeaway you take from today. The pause button. I think we all know this panics like, oh my God, I'm not gonna get everything done. Oh my God. Actually, just breathing is a good pause button too. Yes, Selena, I think you wanted to say something. Oh, sorry. My bad.
I've got lots.
I thought you wanted to build up. I thought you wanted to build on what Marion and Chisholm were saying.
I thought it was fantastic. That's great stuff.
Okay, so we've been talking about the responsibility of leadership and how leaders can help with the mental health of the employees. Now I'm going to you, Chisholm. So even in our team, we tend to forget sometimes that you are a person with your struggles and challenges because we generally see you as constantly high performing. So as an entrepreneur and an employer, how do you navigate your role as a caretaker, caregiver? And how do you negotiate taking care of yourself while ensuring that your employees are thriving?
Yeah, when someone has like a great answer for that, I'd love to hear it. I guess like I will recount, you know, like Marion's sentiments, because as much as I am an employee, I'm also an entrepreneur, and I think it is in the same way, and I don't always take care of myself. I'm always an afterthought. You know, like you have to take care of the clients, you have to take care of the team, you have to do this, you have to do that. Yeah, so it's something that I struggle with. Like I want to say like I have it figured out, but that would be a lie, you know. And I navigate it with difficulty, just learning to be more aware. I think I'm getting better. Because there was a time when my off button came when I was like in a full-blown anxiety attack, right? And now I'm actually more aware and more able to see how my stomach is feeling and how my body is feeling and how I can't breathe or how many times I have to catch a breath. So I'm actively trying to be more intentional. But I think my role as a caretaker, it changes. I think that I feel a lot of responsibility on my shoulder for the team, and we keep growing, and I still have to show up every day for everyone. You know, I've had some difficulties lately, but also just saying that there were things I couldn't get out from. You know, there were things that I still had to show up for because I had to be there. Otherwise, it won't be done. And sometimes just reflecting on the reality, like, and this is what I would say to people: you're not indispensable, take time off. But if I take time off, you know, that might cost us money, that might pay somebody's salary for the next 4 months. And I can't, you know, so it's just that balance that I struggle with, and it is difficult, you know, and I always think about, I think now when I have employees that I have to care for, worry for, you know, I'm also beginning to reflect heavily on the reality that no one actually cares for me. You know, like, who takes care of the leaders? That is a conversation we don't often have. Like, we talk about leadership is responsible for this and for that, but when leaders don't have systems and structures to support their mental health and well-being, you're setting them up to fail. You know, so it's also just thinking about that. And for me, I've always just found solace in usually my girlfriends who go through similar things, who I could just meet and have a chat with. Or yeah, Marin would tell you I send her random voice notes, you know, just like complaining with language that should not be used by anyone, and definitely not a child, you know, just like sometimes it just needs to get out. And it's also just that thing of familiarity where it's easy for me to just leave Marin a voice note and just complain about something and understand that she will understand. And I don't have to like, oh, by the way, this was where I'm coming from, I'm not a bad leader or this or that. It's like just having that space. So I think just in general, to round up here, I think I don't try to negotiate it anymore. Like, I just try to tackle it head on with humility and honesty, and know that I don't always show up for myself as I should, but I would like to do better.
Can I jump in there, Eva?
Yes, please.
I have a vision for the future of organizations and for leaders that we're talking about specifically here in that question in relation to Chisholm, because I've seen Chisholm do this. Actually, she didn't mention it, but I've seen her do it. But for leaders and for decision makers and for people that are holding a lot of responsibility wherever they are in an organization, to reach sideways. So other people that are in the situation, other entrepreneurs, other CEOs, other senior managers, other people that are dealing with the same weight of responsibility as yourself. And when we were talking about organizations allowing space for that, so, you know, talking to our network, talking to people we love, just that profound power of listening and being present for other people is absolutely transformative, and it is for all of us. And we don't intentionally create enough spaces in our personal lives and definitely in our work lives for this. And there are leadership courses, there are incubators, there are women CEO retreats, there are so many things going on. And of course, we can also get therapy, but a lot of these things are very expensive and unaffordable for many people. But actually, there are ways that we can be intentional of just coming together and putting some time aside to prioritize, as I was talking about, that reflective space, being present, being listening, so that you can come as you are and feel seen, to refill your cup so that you can be resilient and your full self, as we've talked about.
Yes, oh, absolutely. I see that Christopher also mentioned something about CEOs that must master self-leadership, self-compassion on a very high level, as they don't have any superior leaders carrying and modeling their desired behavior. So this is a good idea, like having mentors, having therapists. I think even like a group of leaders sharing their experiences and listening to each other, which is very, I know, for instance, here at Her Space, we have a women's group, and we just Selena is leading that, and we just sit and listen to each other, and how healing that can be. So this is one of the things that leaders might also do. So yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I also saw a question pop up as well of, you know, the onus being also on the individual as well as the leader or the manager. And I don't know if you've had, you know, maybe there's a better tool than this, Selena, but the DEAR model, where it's the describe the situation, E is express your feelings, A is assert what the changes could be, or like assert what your needs are. And then, sorry, R is reinforce what that means for you. So it's just like, you know, sometimes these little quips are really helpful to go, because I feel like there's so many when it comes to how we sell ourselves in an interview. It's like, here's the star model, here's this or that. But just having some sort of tools of, okay, well, this is what it takes for me to sit down and be able to provide the information that my leader needs. So, you know, that's something that I mentioned at the beginning. Obviously, if you have people in your team or you have a leader that sees you, that's the most wonderful position that you can be in. But there is a responsibility as individuals to try our best to say, this is how I'm feeling about a situation, and this is what needs, or this is what I hope to happen in order to have better outcomes, whatever they may be for the individual.
And I also just wanted to add to that, that one of the things that I find is also very useful is to have compassion for myself when I don't meet my high standards of being aware. Because I have like super high standards for myself where like I should be aware this should not happen to me. And there was a time when like I would near burnout or I'd have anxiety, and then there's just that shame and guilt and annoyance with myself for allowing this to happen when I saw signs that I could have, you know, like nipped it in the bud. So I think what I find very useful is, I think one of the things I've learned throughout the past couple of years is just being kind to myself. And that has been really, really, really empowering to say, Chisom, you know, if Eva had done this, you would have laughed it off and moved on. But then Chisom does it and it's like, oh my gosh, the world has to end, you know, and just like treat myself the way I treat other people that I care about. And oftentimes I think we don't hug ourselves enough. And for me, it's just been really relevant to center myself and be kind.
I love what you're saying, and I found that really helpful for me as well. I think the terminology is something like double dissociated metacognition. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to like labels, but I find them really, really helpful for how to manage my own mindset and well-being. But it's this ability to look outside of yourself as if you were someone else looking in. And sometimes I think it's really hard for us to do that when we hold ourselves to a high account, and you know, maybe we feel guilt or shame for letting someone down, even though it's just like, shit, I'm just tired, I'm you know, I need to just have some downtime. I really struggle with that myself. And so yeah, just being able to look outside yourself and think, if I was another person, how would I feel? You know, when I do that, I'm like, oh my God, like, of course they should have time to themselves, or of course they should take care of themselves first. I can wait. I don't need to, you know, go out for that dinner. We can reschedule, you know, whatever it might be, or I can wait another day until, you know, this email gets sent. So perspective. I think sometimes we lose it because, you know, we're just in that, again, in that cycle of just going. But looking outside ourselves to slow down is really important.
Oh gosh, absolutely. I think we're worst on ourselves, so much worse than we would ever be on other people, and holding us to standards that sometimes are not even possible, like some superhero standards. Yes, so I guess we have 2 minutes before we start questions from the audience. And for the last question that I would like to ask you, ladies, is for each of you to share with us like your top tip on supporting mental health in the workplace. Can you, Selena, start?
What a difficult question. Just distilling this down to one. If I had to distill it to one, I would say that normalizing conversations about mental health is a really good place to start. Ask people how they are, ask people twice, ask how they really are. And that might involve skilling ourselves up a little bit to be able to deal with the real answer of how people are. And also a little bit of exploration as to building our own confidence to be comfortable in sharing how we really are. I liked what Chisholm said a lot about what are our boundaries, what's the disclosure, and that changes day to day. And I think these small shifts change culture. And it means that if we're all normalizing conversations about mental health, it's more likely to become a priority. It's more likely to be embedded in the ways that we've talked about. So ask people how they are, ask people twice, ask people how they really are.
Marin, can you continue?
Wholeheartedly, absolutely agree with you, Selena. I think building on that, so having normalizing the conversations. I think also being able to, I think when you spoke about compassionate leadership, I think there's also being compassionate as an individual, not just as a leader. It's listening, it's showing concern and identifying how to help. And I think being able to have these discussions, but also go, okay, there's something about we talk about empathy and compassion and the difference between people experiencing burnout. I know that there's some stats, I can't think of them off the top of my head now, but when you are when you're expressing emotional empathy, you're more inclined to your brain reacts with the stress centers as opposed to I can't remember some sort of endorphins. Anyway, I will find that information so that you can put it in the follow-up. But this whole side of how we can be compassionate as individuals and listen, showing concern, that cognitive empathy, and then saying, how can I help? Sometimes it might be just listening. Sometimes it might be being the accomplice and getting in the car and finding something to burn together, So just asking, and also knowing what where your capabilities lie, and maybe they just need to talk to you, but maybe you don't have the tools to be able to really solve what's going on. I think having friends or peers or colleagues to share with is one thing, but if Selena came to me and said, hey, I've got a broken leg, and I try and fix it, maybe that's not the best solution because I'm not the person, but I can definitely say, oh my God, how are you feeling? This must be awful. Let me help. Call you an ambulance. What do you need right now? So there's that side of thing. And I think something that I haven't really talked about much, but really believe in, and this comes back to EQ, is like cognitive behavioral therapy is all about A, allowing your emotions, C, considering your values, and T, taking action in light of your values. But that first thing of just allowing your feelings before you even do anything, before you talk to a peer or a manager, I think we don't give ourselves enough of those spaces to just allow and just be and take that pressure off. So that ACT principle has been super, super helpful for me.
Thank you, Marin. That's so helpful. And Chisholm, what would you tell us?
I'm trying to figure out what to add to what Selena and Marin just said, because I completely agree with them. I think, when we normalize conversations, and I think it could be relevant as well to assess our assumptions, and perhaps maybe always start from the position of curiosity, then assumption, because when we look at unconscious bias, people you make decisions about somebody just by seeing them or what you know about them. Assess the assumptions that we make about the workplace, that we make about mental health. And I think from a leadership perspective, in creating systems and structures, I think we've all talked about it today, is make sure it's inclusive from the very get-go of everyone, and that you include the people it's meant for in the design. Yeah, I think one of the first, my always go to when it comes to mental health is just come from a point of active listening. When somebody's sharing something with you, listen to understand, don't listen to respond, right? And I think that's very important.
Oh, that's very important in so many situations, and we are all so prone to doing absolutely different. It's a very intentional thing, and thank you, Chisholm. That is very, very important. Okay, thank you so much. We've come to an end to the Q&A part where I'm asking questions. Now I'm going to see what our audience wants to know. So instead of half an hour, just so our speakers know, we will have about 25 minutes. So just keep the answers a little bit shorter. So let's see, so we can get to all of them. It would be really nice to get to all of them. So first question that we got was a question from Manuela. Do you have experiences with mental health issues of migrants who have experienced war? Do you see an influence of the current situation in Ukraine on the mental well-being of people you work with? It is a current challenge in Poland now. Has anyone anything to add to this?
I mean, I can, from two perspectives. One of our partners in Iceland is currently working with over 100 women from Ukraine. And, you know, from a mental health perspective, it's difficult. I mean, it's trauma, it's people have gone through trauma and they're still traumatized, you know, and it's difficult to, I think from an immigrant's perspective, like I've moved to Norway, left everything I knew and started afresh. And that was, you know, like someone dragged the world from, you know, under me. And then to be in a place where one day you had home, you had your family, you had your loved ones. And the next day it was taken without, anyways, you know, I think that this can be really challenging, and what we can do for people and what my, you know, partner is doing in Iceland is creating a safe space for them where they can actually process their emotions and make it okay to share whatever it is they are feeling, that they don't feel like they are alone. And I think it's in these shared stories and experiences, at least I know for me personally, and for a lot of people I know, sometimes just saying the thing reduces the burden a little bit. Like it's that thing about a story shared is a burden shared. I'm probably messing this up, but from that perspective. And I think from another perspective, from the people who have not necessarily like left Ukraine, looking at our workplace environment, you know, Eva comes from Croatia, and we have another colleague who's currently on Mama Pam, who comes from Slovakia. And I know that when that war erupted, it was very tense in the office because it took Eva back to a time, I think it was the Soviet Union. Is that right, Eva? No, sorry.
Yeah, it went me back to the beginning of 90s when our war in Yugoslavia was starting. Yeah, it was very similar.
Yeah, and you know, for other people, it was too close to home, you know, and there's a lot that happens, I think, from a trauma perspective that I think it's important to definitely work with a healthcare professional that is skilled in trauma and in issues, you know, that come from war and displacement and everything else and all the other baggage that it comes with. But I can just imagine is traumatizing, and as a non-professional in, you know, trauma, I can just say that sometimes it's just nice to be a listening ear and create safe spaces where they can actually start to feel at home, because currently they don't have home.
And I wanted to add to that. Firstly, it's a field of work, conflict response and humanitarian work, and I'm not an expert in that. They're not situations that I've worked in from a mental health perspective, and I think it's important that we look to people that have direct experience of these kinds of situations for concrete understanding of what the situation is. But from my experience, what I know from working with international NGOs and partners, clients and contracts of organizations that do work in this kind of sphere, is that there is twofold. One is that when you're going into a conflict situation, a humanitarian necessity is critical. The basic needs are of the first most importance, and mental health is seen as something secondary. And I think we need to think about donors who are funding such support, and that comes down to governments and policies, development aid budgets around actually putting more resource into, as we know, trauma-informed care, compassionate first response, and making sure that mental health is absolutely integral. But again, you know, colleagues of mine in that field would be able to answer that more concretely. But the other thing I have seen in people that work in these sectors is that if we're talking about burnout and we're talking about stress, people that are working in conflict zones, whether those are, you know, humanitarian responders or journalists, etc., they themselves are critically lacking in mental health support. And there's a real gap at the moment for all the things that we were talking about, you know, just to acknowledge it, it's really important. We're very much talking from a Western perspective here. You know, I'm sitting here in Oslo, I work for a Norwegian organization. Most of my consultancy clients have been in Europe and, you know, countries in Asia Pacific that have decent support. But I also support organizations in East Africa with my role with Youth Mental Health Norway. And in Uganda and in Ethiopia, we have partners who have staff who have been through trauma from war and from conflict and from brutality. And the situation is bleak actually for people. And there is a global need for decent mental health support that we can roll out across sectors, and it's a critical need, and there needs to be an international approach to really supporting this more thoroughly.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Selena. So I'm going to just continue, and Manuela also had a question that you can maybe just quickly touch upon. Do you see a different approach of men compared to women in regard to talking openly about their mental health issues nowadays? In my opinion, it is much harder to support and educate men in the workplace because it is still a taboo for many of them. Who would like to touch on that?
I mean, I agree. At Diversify, we do a lot of work and we hold a lot of spaces around mental health and wellness. And the majority of the people who turn up are women. I don't think it's because men don't have the same challenges with like not finding work or integrating into the culture. But I think we've done men, society as a whole, a huge disservice, you know, where if I also look at it from perspective of being Nigerian and also even growing up in the US, where men are not supposed to cry, you know, like there are adjectives that defines how that doesn't make you a man. And I think it's such a shame, you know, and I think that men carry a lot of responsibility, you know, and that added shame, you know, where at least I think for a lot of women, you know, you don't necessarily see yourself as, or you don't think of yourself from a social construct of, I have to be the breadwinner of this family, I have to have things together, but it's a man's responsibility in a lot of cultures. And yeah, I just think it's a shame, but I do agree that this is the case, you know, like I can even see it among my group of friends. It's so easy for me to just like meet Mary and Eva or Selena and just like break down like, oh my gosh, I need wine and I just want to cry, and I will cry, you know, but I see like my guy friends like just struggling and just, they don't have an outlet. And I think it's a really terrible thing we've done as a culture, as a society. Karen, what do you think? Oh, sorry, Selena.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a shift. There's a huge shift, even in just my experience in working in mental health the last 17 years or so. In the UK, I think, health services, care sectors are majority women. I worked for a charity for a long time, and we were, I think, 75% women. But here in Norway, youth mental health Norway, I see, I don't know what the percentage is, but just anecdotally, it looks like pretty 50-50 to me. And I think young men are different. I think there is still societal stigmas and issues for sure, but I do see a really positive shift in young people in general, but young men being able to talk more openly and accept each other for lots of different issues in their life, their intersectional pressures and stresses, and specifically their mental health. And I'm really excited about that. And I'm excited about the projects that I see that are involving young people and young men talking about mental health.
I think just to nuance that as well, I think this might be true in the West, but it's not true in, a lot of emerging market countries. And it's definitely not the reality in, a lot of African countries. But I think it's absolutely valid for the West, where, you hear more about mental health. There's less stigma, right? Whereas in a lot of African countries, it's still a huge stigma, and that has not changed, and that needs to change.
I would also say that I find it, I remember hearing years ago, and just, from experience, I see how this, how relevant this is. I find, generally speaking, women are very relational with face-to-face time, right? We like to sit and, as you said, Chisholm, get a wine or a coffee, debrief, and we like that face-to-face. Whereas I think men, and especially heteronormative men, they find it easier to express themselves in a shoulder-to-shoulder situation. So, there's initiatives, say in Australia, for example, like the men's sheds. Selena, I know you talked about some initiatives where guys are gaming together and then they talk about their feelings afterwards. And I think we need to look at the differences because of these cultural contexts where we've had this man up, you don't express your emotions, like this is, being a girl, like there's so many negative connotations for all genders, but especially just talking about men and heteronormative men and mental health. There's a lot of shame attached to it. So I think being able to say, okay, where do we, like, meeting men where they're at, and these activity-based or shoulder-to-shoulder activities. I know whether it's been my brothers or ex-boyfriends, as well as people that I'm coaching. So across the board, there's usually a sense of having to do something together before you start talking about feelings. So yeah, I think there is different stigmas attached for all genders, but in this case, meeting people where they're at and on a cultural context, being able to have that more experiential when it comes to doing things really helps break down some of those stigmas and getting men to share.
If I could add something just quickly that I thought of when Marion was sharing, and also Selena, I think that we also have to look at the systems. So, I think Selena spoke earlier about like systems in the country and how they enable or diminish mental health. So if we think of, today I'm calling Nigeria out. For example, in Nigeria, where it is illegal to be gay, you will go to prison for, I think, 12 or 14 years, which is preposterous. It's ridiculous. Now, just imagine how that system negatively compounds the mental health of people in the LGBTQIA plus community, and if the country does not recognize your existence, does not validate your authenticity, then that is also problematic. Like, how do you get help? And I think, of course, like, groups like Marion talked about, and also I know, like, some of my gay friends, they have their communities where they can talk and share and be themselves. But it's also sad to know that they can only be themselves within a restricted space, and that they cannot walk out on the streets the same way I can and be recognized and validated as a human being.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this is where, again, intersectionality is coming to play. And, if we think about how it is today, that still men are kind of mostly in the leadership positions. And if these are the problems, and mental health is such an important thing at the workplace, how do we negotiate these two things if they cannot share, if they're shamed for their mental health issues, or even sharing, how could they create the space for their employees then? So these are all very, very important questions that, let's just hope that with time, as Selena said, that it's getting better, and it's getting better. I also think that it's getting better, especially here in the West. Now, I come from Croatia, and it's not better. It's absolutely not better. Men are all still shamed for certain things that are considered girly, as Marin said, and especially sharing emotions. But yeah, let's see. So we have about 11 minutes until the end. So I went through the questions, and we touched upon some of the questions that we got from the people from the audience. But I would like to look at this question, which is very, very interesting, and it's directed to Marin. But I think any one of you can share and tell us your point of view. And it is: Norway has a pretty good work-life balance compared to many countries in the world. Yet there are still many people on sick leave here because of mental health issues. Why do you think that is?
Oh, okay. I think that's really interesting, because I have noticed that as well. Like when I'm running workshops and, I'm trying to get an overview of people in the team, it'll be like, this person's on sick leave, that person's on sick leave, and it's like, whoa, okay, this person's 50% sick leave. This is full time for the 3 months, or da, da, da. One thing is, I think that there's a system that, supports people, and that system is being used in which it should. I remember I read a stat that I think that 70 billion NOK is lost in absences every year. What was the question? Why do you think it is with this work-life balance?
Why do you think it is? Yeah, there's this work and life balance, but people are still sick from mental health issues.
If we take a step back from the actual work-life balance, this is getting a little bit existential, but that's me. I think there's a fundamental issue with the way we work in general, and just to put it briefly, I often reflect on, okay, if aliens, started circling around, maybe they popped into Norway or whatever city you live in, and it's like, it's 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, and it's like, oh, look at all the luscious rolling hills and the waterfalls and the grass and, the lovely nature, and it's sunny or it's snowing or it's wonderful. Where are all the people? And they're either driving into a concrete jungle, sitting in a cubicle, tapping away. I'm talking about the knowledge working industry primarily here. Of course, there are nuances in others, but if we just take knowledge workers, for example, like this is what we're doing, or we're working from home in, the most beautiful times of the day. I think we haven't transitioned enough from the industrial era, where we came in, we were cogs in a wheel, we were putting things together. We have surpassed that, but the way we work hasn't. So I think, we're not wired to be sitting down for 8 hours a day, like constantly outputting. So from a kind of a human perspective, I think if we come back right to that stage, we need to do better in terms of how we create workspaces and how we work. And it is shifting due to COVID, but still, like, we are working. If you take sort of the general 9 to 5, we're working in the best part of the day, and we're leaving the slithers for our loved ones, and we're not completing these stress cycles, and we're not able to have that break for ourselves. So I think we need to have a good hard look at the way that we're working holistically. I think there's great initiatives that countries are doing, like having 4-day work weeks, for example. I know there's some books there's an anthropologist, Rutger Bregman, and he talks about this utopia for realists and how we should be looking at transitioning out of these kind of 9 to 5, even 4 days a week, which that as a model should have been implemented back in the 70s, because it was determined that we would have enough, our economies would be fit to do that. But because we're in a very neoliberal capitalistic world, it hasn't worked out that way. So that's a big conversation in itself. But I think that there's a system that's set up for it. The ways that we're working isn't leading to healthy and fulfilling lifestyles. And so, yeah, I think Selena would be better to talk more about it from a super practical perspective, but I can talk about it from a very existential one, that the way we're working is fundamentally flawed and it needs changing.
Can I also add that, and I definitely agree with everything Marion has said. I think that this could also, the situation in Norway can also result, or might also result from the fact that mental health is still very much considered a state problem. Like, the state will take care of you. I don't have to do anything here. We have systems and structures for that. And I think that, sure, it's great when you have the luxury of like a socialist system where the state takes care of everything. But I think also nuancing this, like my example about Nigeria and, the horrible laws there against like people in the queer community, your workplace can still create an environment where a gay person can show up to work and thrive, right? And if you think about it, even within a Western construct, when women are bisexual, it's so easy for them to say like, yeah, I'm bisexual, and that is easily accepted. But then when men are bisexual, they're often forced to only talk about, their dates with women and not, say their dates with other men. So I think that workplaces also have a responsibility within Norway to not just pan it off to the government, like the states will take care of you, I have nothing to do with this, and take responsibility for their employees and the type of culture that they create.
Yeah, I think this is so interesting and something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. I'm really interested in how we measure some of the ways of looking at mental health and implementing mental health structures and support, because although there are well-being indexes, which internationally are used, and Norway notoriously has the happiest people, really high well-being, and just as Marion was saying, Norway has one of the the second highest employment rate of all OECD countries, which is basically 38 countries come together, they share data like this. 7 out of 10 people in Norway are employed, but they have the highest sickness absence in the world. And one of the top 2 reasons for that is mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression. Now, I think we could talk for a long time about why that is, and I don't think there's a necessarily a clear answer to that, but the facts are there. And on paper, Norway have enviable mental health policies. They have really progressive policies around getting people into work, supporting them back into work after time off. But totally what Chisholm was saying, I think when you have a really seemingly robust state system, the responsibility within organizations can be put onto the state, and we can get complacent. And I think organizations need the motivation, the justification for why, evidence-based reasons why it's important and imperative for them to take mental health seriously and to mainstream it in everything that they do. And I think we need to think about how we can measure that in different organizations. What is the impact of better mental health support systems? What is the impact of listening? These things that feel very intangible. I think there's a real gap at the moment. If anyone has any bright ideas or wants to sit around a table and think about it, I think it's something that we really need to move towards, about metrics around mental health support and the impact and how things can be improved.
And I just want to say something quickly on that. I agree that we really need to put in proper measures. But I think, again, it comes back to this human element. I mean, when it comes to women or minorities or mental health or sustainability, we're always going back to these are the stats, these are the stats. It's like, how about just be a good person and, connect from one human to another human, that this is what's needed, instead of having to go back to reinforcing that, you know, the bottom line is going to be better, and, you know, you're going to get better outcomes in terms of work. Like, aren't we better than that? Shouldn't we be doing more to just say, as from one individual to another, okay, how can we do better? And just be better without having to have the financial statistics to back it up. I mean, let's try and move past that, please.
Rich.
Absolutely. And you know, I was also thinking, I think it's also what contributes to this is this culture that is probably you can see it in the whole Scandinavia, where people are very individualistic and you know, to themselves, very private, and a lot of people are alone. They don't have connections, and like state is taking care of your parents are basically alone. So lack of community and lack of true connection is also why, for instance, in Scandinavia, it has one of the highest rates of suicide, although, as Selena said, it also has one of the highest well-being index. So I think this contributes to the whole mental health issue, and why people, yeah.
I think like if we look at it from a data perspective, I love data. So then I'm going to sit around that table. And the thing is, data is misleading. Like, what is being measured in these well-being indexes? Like, I've looked at, because when the thing came out that Norway was the happiest country to live in the world, and all my friends from the US were like, oh my gosh, I have to move there. And I'm like, now let's look at what is being measured. Like, what is being measured at things like healthcare. So of course, Norway ranks super high, but it's not necessarily like the state of emotional well-being that makes you happy. It's just economic resources that makes your life easier. So I think like we need to nuance also the metrics that are being captured. And just to finalize here, I think that what we need is a combination of Marin's view on be a freaking decent human being, and Selena's on we need the numbers, because some people are not, and they need the metrics, and they need to be told, hey, do this and you will get 10% more profits. It sucks, but that's where we are.
Absolutely. Oh my God, I cannot believe it's been 2 hours, ladies. It's been 2 hours and it flew so quickly. And I think there are so many things that we have touched upon and that you shared, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm sure that the audience is also grateful for that, and that everyone is going with a lot of takeaways here. But there's also so many things that we didn't have time to touch upon, but I hope in the future we will come back to this very, very important topic. Thank you.
As expected though, right? It's like put Marin and Selena and myself on a, yeah.
Yes,
I love this table of getting together and having these discussions of, you know, creating better outcomes. You know, I think it's so needed on a, you know, systemic level, and this systems thinking, as well as from a bottom-up approach. So I love that.